with all of the focus on fraud and waste and abuse in how federal taxpayer dollars are being managed by states, you have to also consider how much money is going to non-government organizations or NGOs. These are nonprofit groups that get grants by state and federal taxpayers to conduct certain services. And there's been a lot of focus and attention on trying to shore that up. If you recall, last year, the Department of Government Efficiency with the Trump administration delving deep into federal spending. But I talked with Lisa Stevenson. She's a partner at NPO Accountants that works directly with non-government organizations getting taxpayer resources to operate certain types of services. And she gives some tips for avoiding red flags that NGOs could possibly get if they're not properly managed. I talked with her about audits that happen, what triggers those audits for federal tax dollars being used. She said audits only come for those groups that are getting $1 million or more.
So any organization receiving less than $1 million, there really isn't proper oversight at times because they can have multiple federal funders, but the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. In fact, what I had mentioned to Lauren, the fraud that I discussed, which of course I can't name any names, but it involved the nonprofit billing the same expenses to multiple government grants. And so that shouldn't be allowed to happen, but there's no oversight at the federal level. And so until someone else, whether it's an independent auditor comes in and they do the audit, or unless internal staff becomes aware and then they blow the whistle, those things can go on for quite a while and be undetected.
So how those dollars ultimately are tracked if they don't have those audits for grant recipients under $1 million, she says, is something that's important to focus on because these are taxpayer resources and limited taxpayer resources at that.
And the reason why it's important is, again, kind of back to because this isn't the organization's money, and fraud can happen in any organization, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit. But if no one's looking, that's how those things happen. One of the things that we really tell nonprofits that they need to be on the alert for, some red flags, if you would, is they really need to look at the organization's internal controls. And, that can be physical controls, like if you have paper checks, don't leave them laying out, or don't share passwords, in terms of technology. But the biggest internal control that probably needs to be addressed, and it's a lot of the work I do, is designing their segregation of duties. And so for an organization to have a proper segregation of duties, they're going to need 3 people involved with every accounting process. And that's when the board really can step in and place themselves in some of these roles. They don't really want to be in the day-to-day, and they shouldn't be in the day-to-day, but on a monthly basis, they can be reviewing certain things to make sure that there is proper oversight. Some of the recommendations that we give is, for board members specifically, at some point they should verify that the executive director's payroll is what the board has approved to be their payroll. Because, payroll is an internal process. It's probably, either processed by the executive director or an accountant. But unless a board member asks to see a payroll report, they really don't know for sure that, what the executive director is being paid. So they really should verify that. One of the other easy ones that I feel like it doesn't often happen until it gets pointed out is a board member should be reviewing the credit card statement and receipts of the executive director, and not assigning that to a subordinate of the executive director.
The conversation with Lisa Stevenson with NPO Accountants and the red flags that could pop up for non-government organizations receiving state tax dollars. She also talked about the consequences for non-government organizations who are found to have potential waste. Is it intentional? Is it not intentional? That doesn't seem to matter when it comes to the consequences.
Whether or not it's an unintentional error or whether or not it's an intentional fraud, the organization is in a position where they might have to pay that money back. And so, regardless of why it happened or how, they're on the hook to the government entity. And so, you know, that's the risk. And when you sit on a board, it's now your name associated with that organization. Hopefully, when you sit on a board, you ensure that there's D&O insurance so that you're not personally ever sued for anything that happens, that's out of your control. But, regardless of being sued, your name is still attached to that board. And so you have a duty, you have a responsibility. And the government doesn't care that, like if let's say it's an executive director and they, you know, commit fraud. They don't care that it's that person. They are going to criminally prosecute, but they are still going to hold the nonprofit accountable to repay the money. So a board can't, assume, well, if the executive director does that, then they're going to have to be the one pay. Well, certainly they will be prosecuted, but it doesn't mean that the government entity is going to give the nonprofit entity a pass, because it really is their responsibility to make sure that those controls were in place.
And more on those internal controls, Lisa says that it's much needed because you don't want to find things after the fact and be having to adhere to those consequences of getting those tax dollars back to the appropriate hands.
I feel really strongly that the internal controls have to be in place to prevent it from occurring, because once it gets detected by an auditor, it's already happened. It's already possibly too late. Because an organization closes its year and then maybe 3, sometimes 6 months or longer later is when the auditor comes in. So, that fraud could have happened a whole year ago or more. And that's not a very timely manner in which to detect something. So, really, it's the whole ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If they have internal controls in place that would prevent somebody, or, have these checkpoints every month that would detect, that is really a much better way to handle, preventing fraud. It's the proactivity versus reactivity. Yeah, again, once the auditor finds it, it's a little late.
Again, thanks to Lisa Stevenson with NPO Accountants for that insight on potential red flags NGOs could find if there's mismanagement of your taxpayer resources. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. Join us back here Thursday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.